Welcome to True Reddit Stories, where tales that feel like fiction unfold in real life. Get ready because today you'll hear a story filled with pain, betrayal, and justice as a mother transforms her loss into a brutal truth laid bare before the world. So sit back, turn off the lights, and let the story take you away. Chapter 1: The First Cracks. I still remember so clearly the day I thought I had everything. A warm home, a husband who once swore he would protect me for the rest of my life, and a small family I believed would walk with me until the very end. But perhaps the very moment we think we are at our happiest is when fate begins to place its first question mark. When I first got married, I was like any other young woman, overflowing with hope, ready to sacrifice, ready to build a home with everything I had. I worked tirelessly, not just to provide for the family, but because I truly believed that my efforts would be valued. Every dinner I cooked, every time I quietly cleaned the house while he sat scrolling on his phone, all of it I considered part of my responsibility and love. But then, day by day, I began to realize love is not always returned. The man I once thought of as my solid shoulder gradually became a stranger. He no longer looked at me with tender eyes. Conversations turned into heavy silences, and sometimes his gaze fell on me as if my very presence was a burden. At first I tried to console myself. Maybe he's just stressed from work. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. But as time passed, the signs became undeniable. He came home later, and later always using work as an excuse, yet he rarely looked tired at all. His phone was locked with a password glued to him as if it were a treasure. And then there were the nights I lay awake in the dark hearing message notifications buzzing endlessly from that phone, while he claimed he was too tired to talk. The unease inside me slowly turned into a hidden wound. It didn't bleed in torrents, but it seeped little by little, making me gradually lose faith in this marriage. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. The woman who once dreamed of a happy family had now become just a shadow, exhausted, waiting, and lost. But what I didn't know was those cracks were only the beginning, and behind that closed door, a real storm was waiting for me to face. Chapter 2: The Yacht Photograph, Betrayal Unveiled. I remember that morning vividly. Sunlight streamed through the narrow slit of the curtains, but instead of bringing warmth, it only made me feel suffocated. I stood before the mirror, staring at my hollowed face, my eyes darkened with sleeplessness. All night I had been haunted by the same images: my husband sitting on a yacht with her, laughing happily while I was collapsing in tears beside my daughter's coffin. There's a saying I once overheard, but only now do I truly understand. Pain doesn't kill you, but it teaches you who really stands by your side. And the truth was brutal. I had only myself. Both families began to gossip. My mother-in-law blamed me for not keeping my husband, while he excused himself with work, telling me I was too sensitive. They say women who lose a child often fall into hysteria, needing someone to hold them close. But I was different. I didn't need a false embrace. I needed the truth. And the truth was painfully clear. On the third day after the funeral, I discovered something that made me both sick to my stomach and startlingly awake. While sorting through my husband's clothes, I found a hotel receipt. The date and time matched exactly the night we rushed our daughter into the emergency room. I remember so vividly how the doctor had urgently called for both parents, and how I ran out of the ER alone, screaming his name into the phone in sheer desperation. And yet, while I was fighting for our daughter's life, he was in a hotel bed, holding another woman. I thought I would smash everything, scream at the top of my lungs, so the whole world would know his true face. But then I grew still. A cold chill ran down my spine. I was no longer the weak woman who clung to him. I would not cry or beg for scraps of pity. From that very moment, I knew if I wanted justice for my daughter, I had to be calm, cunning, and ruthless. So I began to observe. I noticed how he left the house earlier and came back later. I pretended not to care, still cooking meals, still asking questions, still playing the role of the considerate wife. The more relaxed he grew, the more careless he became. And the more evidence I gathered, messages, emails, even photographs of him with her. Each night I sat alone before my computer screen, saving every fragment of betrayal. Pain slowly transformed into fuel. I asked myself, if my daughter were still alive, would she want her mother to collapse, or would she want her mother to rise and protect herself? The answer was crystal clear. A plan for revenge began to take shape in my mind. It wasn't complete yet, but it was enough for me to see a glimmer of light in the darkness. I knew for a truly satisfying ending, I needed time, and I was willing to wait like a patient predator. Chapter 3. When the funeral turned into a stage for exposure. I don't quite know how to describe the feeling of thinking you've managed to stand up after a fall, only to discover there's another trap waiting just ahead. The night after the funeral, when the guests had all gone and the house was left with nothing but the rattling sound of the ceiling fan, I sat alone in the living room. On the table were wilted funeral flowers, their acrid smell clinging to me, as if to remind me that my little girl was truly never coming back. I was about to get up and clean when my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number: he wasn't with your daughter that night. If you want the truth, call back. I read it over and over, my heart pounding as if someone were striking it with a hammer inside my chest. I wanted to throw the phone away to pretend I had never seen that message, but my trembling fingers pressed the call button. A woman's voice came through cold as ice. Do you know where he was that night? On a yacht with me. Then she hung up, leaving me with nothing but the shrill, cutting tone of the disconnect, harsher than any slap to the face. My body froze, my throat tightened, as if someone's hand were choking me. The image formed in my mind, me in mourning clothes, clutching my daughter's portrait, while my husband, the man I thought was drowning in grief, just as I was instead laughing, raising champagne glasses with his mistress on a yacht. Humiliation and fury surged inside me like molten lava, burning and unstoppable. I wanted to scream, to smash everything. But instead, I chose silence. I wiped away my tears, walked over to the altar, and lit an incense stick for my daughter. My love, I promise you, I won't let anyone trample on your memory again. There will be justice. I swear it. The very next morning, I contacted the funeral home. I pretended I needed more photos to display for an extended memorial, but discreetly slipped in the ones the mistress had posted online. She was foolish enough to even tag the yacht's location. I stitched the images together, inserting them right after the slides of my daughter's childhood. On the day of the memorial, relatives, friends, and colleagues all gathered. When the yacht photos flashed across the screen, the entire room fell into stunned silence. I remained seated in the front row, calm as if nothing had happened, but I could hear the whispers, feel the sharp eyes boring into his back. Everyone compared the two sets of images, a little girl who had just passed away and her father grinning drunkenly on the yacht deck with his mistress. His face turned pale and he jumped to his feet, but it was already too late. The whispers had already become knives, shredding his respectable facade in front of everyone. I met his eyes directly. No screaming, no curses. Just one look, a lash across his soul. That night he left early, while I stayed receiving comfort from those who truly cared. In the flickering candlelight, I realized something. Truth doesn't always need to be shouted to be exposed. If revealed at the right moment, it becomes a fatal strike. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. When Every Mask Falls. I remember that day vividly. It began so peacefully that I thought it would simply pass like any other ordinary Tuesday. But life always has a way of turning the blandest of days into the turning point of an entire lifetime. That morning, I was brewing coffee when my phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, someone I hadn't heard from in ages. The content was short, but each word hit me like a blow straight to the chest. He and that woman are still going out openly. Not sure if you already knew. I froze. The cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. Inside me, emotions tangled, part pain, part a dark energy rising to the surface. I was exhausted from being the woman who endured everything. If fate wanted me to see the truth, then I would see it no more looking away. I began digging, quietly, carefully. With every piece of evidence, I gathered the picture of the perfect husband I once trusted, fractured further. It turned out that not only was he betraying me, but he was also siphoning money from our family account to fund his sordid little affair. I trembled with anger, yet at the same time, an eerie coldness began to spread through me. I realized I could no longer cry. My tears had dried up long ago. Instead of collapsing, I started to plan. I didn't want to simply walk away in silence. I didn't want to be the pitiful one in this story. If he had disrespected me, if he had trampled on my trust, then I would show him one thing I was not a pawn for him to control. I would be the one to end the game. As my daughter's death anniversary approached, both families gathered. Neighbors, friends, everyone came to pay their respects. I stood before her altar, my hands trembling, but not from weakness. I was holding the knife I had prepared, and I was about to use it to slash away the false mask of morality my husband wore before everyone. When the memorial began, I kept a calm face, like a grieving mother trying to hold herself together. But inside my heart beat powerfully with every thud. I knew that, in just a few minutes, nothing would ever be the same again. And I waited for that moment to come, the moment I knew would become the fatal cut to his honor. Chapter 5. When the truth is laid bare. I had never believed that one day I would sit in a courtroom watching my ex-husband tremble like a child, caught red-handed while I sat there with a cold smile. The legal battle dragged on for months. He kept hiring lawyers trying to prove that I was exaggerating everything, that I was too harsh and disrespectful of marriage. But the more he tried to defend himself, the deeper he dug his own grave. I had prepared meticulously. Every message, every email, every hotel receipt, even the photos he had secretly posted online with his mistress, I had stored them all carefully. And most importantly, I wasn't alone. Friends, colleagues, even neighbors stepped forward to testify. They had seen, they had heard, and they weren't afraid to speak the truth. When the decisive trial day arrived, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My lawyer stood up, his voice steady, presenting the evidence piece by piece. I watched my ex-husband's face shift from pale to flushed red, beads of sweat forming at his temples. And when the hotel security footage was played, the image of him and his mistress, walking out hand in hand, laughing as though the world belonged to only them, the courtroom nearly erupted. Murmurs, scraping chairs, sharp intakes of breath. I didn't need to utter a single word. The judge's gavel struck, his stern voice echoing, "The evidence is undeniable. This is not only betrayal, but a grave violation of the marriage contract. The ruling is in favor of the plaintiff." In that moment, I felt a release. I had won. I had not only secured custody and what rightfully belonged to me, but I had reclaimed my dignity, the very thing he had tried to trample without mercy. He collapsed into his chair, face contorted, eyes hollow, with the look of a man who had just lost everything. And me, I rose, adjusted my coat, lifted my head high, and walked out of the courtroom like a survivor leaving the battlefield. Yet the deepest satisfaction didn't come from money or legal rights. It came from that one moment when he was forced to face the consequences of his own actions. No place left to hide, no words left to twist. Only the truth, cold, merciless, striking him in the face. And I knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 6. Secrets behind the curtain. I knew this couldn't just end with one shock. The truth I stumbled upon was like an iceberg. The part I'd seen was only the tip. What lay beneath was far darker. And I had already decided no matter how much it hurt, I would expose it all. One night while my husband was asleep, I took his phone. By then I had already learned the habit of checking search histories and hidden apps. He was careful, too careful. But he overlooked one thing in his archived mail. There was a folder with a deceptively ordinary name. Bills and documents. I opened it, and my chest clenched tight. It wasn't utility bills. It was dozens of transfer receipts, hotel deposits, even records of romantic trips. Every time I had believed he was away on business, he had actually been living like a free man with her. But that wasn't the worst of it. In a PDF file, I found a contract for a luxury apartment under her name. And the one who paid the deposit, my husband, which meant while I was struggling to budget every expense to provide for our child, he was using our family's money to build a love nest for his mistress. How did it feel nauseating? Boiling. I sat there staring at the screen, wondering how I could have been so blind for so long. The man I had trusted, the one I had sacrificed my youth for, had been secretly crafting a future that erased both me and our child. In that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living in silence and misery. I had to turn this pain into a weapon. If he could be cold and calculating behind my back, then I could be colder and sharper. The plan began to take shape in my mind. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't confront him only to be deceived once more. Instead, I would quietly gather everything, every message, every receipt, every careless word he let slip. I chose my own way to turn his betrayal into a dagger. And one day I would drive it straight into the heart of the man who had trampled me and my child. That was the moment I realized painful truths are not an ending. They are the beginning of a reckoning he would never see coming. Chapter 7. The final curtain is lifted. I once thought the greatest pain in my life was watching my family fall apart. But I was wrong. There is a pain even greater living in a false family where everyone is merely playing their parts in a carefully staged play. The day the court declared that forged will invalid my parents' house felt like a battlefield. My brother stood frozen, face drained of blood as if life had abandoned him. My sister-in-law, the director of this performance that had lasted for years, screamed that she was innocent, that she had only been following my brother's wishes, that everything she did was for the sake of preserving the family's wealth. But her excuses meant nothing. The evidence I'd presented was too undeniable. What unsettled me most was not their disgrace, but the look in my parents' eyes. Not just shame, but something else, relief. As if at last the truth was exposed and they no longer had to keep covering it up, no longer had to treat me as an outsider. Yet instead of feeling comforted, I felt bitterness rise within me. Why now? Why did no one stand by me when I was that child, pushed away from the dinner table, treated like a guest in my own home? I remember my grandmother's gaze that day. She sat quietly in the corner, her hands trembling as they clutched her cane, her eyes fixed on me, unblinking. She said nothing, only let out a faint sigh. But in that sigh, I heard everything she had known the truth all along. That evening, I returned to my small apartment. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat in silence. I had won. On paper, legally, I had reclaimed my rights. My place, the truth. Yet the victory felt unbearably heavy. There was no joy in it, only a vast emptiness. It took me days to understand the most satisfying ending isn't watching others fall, it's standing tall. Yourself, no longer needing anyone to validate your worth. I didn't need pity from my family, nor their belated apologies. I already had my own life, my career, my friends, my independence, all built by my own hands. And one afternoon, as I stood by the window, watching the last light of day spill across the rooftops, I realized something. I was no longer angry. All the resentment, the abandonment, the lies, the injustice had become nothing more than the past. And that past had forged who I was now, stronger, steadier, freer than anyone in that family could ever be. At the final family gathering, I spoke only one sentence: I forgive you all, but I will never return. This family chose to abandon me long ago, and today I choose to walk away. Then I stood, leaving behind faces frozen in shocked confusion and belated tears. The door closed gently behind me like the ending of a long novel. But for me, it wasn't the end at all. It was the beginning of a brand new chapter. Chapter 8. The Courtroom and the Verdict. I never imagined I would one day step into a courtroom as the key witness in a case tied so directly to my own family. Yet that day came. When the heavy doors opened, the air inside was so cold, it seemed every breath carried weight. All eyes turned toward me, then shifted to Marcus, my ex-husband, the man I had once trusted with my life. He sat there in a crisp suit, polished and proper, but the unease in his eyes betrayed him. Beside him sat his former mistress, the woman who had conspired with him in every betrayal, every cruel scheme against me and my child. Ironically, the two of them now sat side by side on the defendant's bench, bound not by love, but by the truth exposed in broad daylight. My lawyer rose, voice steady and commanding. "Your Honor, this is not merely a case of infidelity. This is betrayal, exploitation, and a deliberate conspiracy to strip my client Sarah of both her family and her rights as a mother." Each word struck like a blade cutting through my memories. Sleepless nights, whispered lies, manipulations disguised as tenderness, they all came rushing back. But unlike before, I no longer felt small. I felt strong. I was no longer a victim, I was fighting for justice. When it was Marcus's turn, he stood clearing his throat, desperately clinging to composure. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I never intended to harm my wife. We simply were no longer compatible." The room erupted with whispers. My lawyer gave a dry, disdainful laugh. "Not compatible? Then how do you explain the photographs of adultery, the text messages plotting to push her out of her own family's company, the financial schemes designed to strip her of her assets? Is that what you call incompatibility?" Marcus paled. He glanced at me silently, begging for a shred of mercy. But in my heart there was none left. That man was no longer my husband, only a stranger finally cornered by his own deceit. Then came the witness testimony, an ex-colleague of Marcus. I held my breath as he revealed everything, the secret meetings, the boasts Marcus made, his arrogant promises that soon he would have it all, the company, the wealth, and his so-called freedom. I still remember the words repeated in court, "She's just the last obstacle I need to get rid of." My chest tightened, but at the same time I felt a strange relief. I was no longer the only one who knew. The truth was no longer mine to bear alone. It now stood in the open, undeniable. That day, the trial ended with a heavy judgment. Marcus and his mistress were found guilty of deceit, financial fraud, and conspiracy. I was granted full custody of my child, along with the rightful share of the family assets. But more than anything, I was granted back my dignity. When the judge's gavel struck for the final time, I drew a deep breath. Eyes turned toward me, not with pity anymore, but with respect. I stood, walked out of the courtroom, my steps firm and unassisted. This time, I needed no one to guide me. I was free. Behind me, Marcus's voice broke through the air. "Sarah, I'm sorry. Please give me one more chance." I paused, turned, and met his eyes with a cold smile. "You had every chance, and you burned them all yourself." Then I turned my back for good, walking forward without looking back. Because the path ahead for me and for my child was clear at last, untouched by the poison of the past. Chapter 9. The Day I Rose. I will never forget that morning. The rain was falling lightly, the sky gray and heavy, and I sat in my usual cafe with a cup of black coffee, watching the hurried crowd pass by. The past months had driven me to my limits, endless phone calls from my husband's family, insults spat in my face, layers of lies, and those long nights curled up in an empty house, listening to my own heart, pounding so violently it felt like it might tear through my chest. I used to think I could never escape, but that day, for the first time in years, I saw it with absolute clarity. I had endured enough, and if I didn't rise up, no one would save me. When I called the lawyer, my hand trembled so badly I almost dropped the phone. I poured everything out, how my husband had left with his mistress, how they mocked and humiliated me openly in front of the relatives, how they tried to throw me out of the very home I had helped build. I expected the lawyer to sigh, or shake his head in pity. Instead, his voice was firm, resolute. You have more than you realize, and this time they won't get away so easily. Those words were like a spark landing on the ashes inside my chest. I began gathering documents, bank statements, secret messages, even the photos they carelessly flaunted on social media. I never imagined I could be so meticulous, so patient. Yet as I worked, I felt a strange, powerful current within me. Every page, every screenshot became like an arrow. I was sharpening arrows I would one day fire straight at the ones who had destroyed me. My husband's family still thought I was nothing but a foolish, weak, useless woman. They sneered at my silence, but they didn't know that my silence was no longer submission, it was preparation. And then the day came. The day I walked into that courtroom, I knew I was no longer the trembling, cornered, frightened woman I once had been. I wore a white blouse, my hair pulled back neatly, a thick folder clutched firmly in my hands. When I saw my husband and his mistress across the room, pretending at composure, though their eyes flickered nervously, I felt something rise inside me. Not sorrow, not tears, but a quiet, cutting satisfaction. For the first time after everything I knew, I was standing up for myself, and this time they would pay the price. Chapter 10, When Justice Speaks. I remember that morning vividly, not the golden sunlight or the clear sky, but the trembling in my hands as I gripped the thick folder my lawyer had prepared. The final day of the trial had come. I was no longer the exhausted, fragile woman who had staggered through months of struggle. I was a mother, a warrior, standing tall as I entered the courtroom, ready to put an end to the nightmare that had haunted my family. The room was silent, but the air was dense, heavy. I could hear the faint whispers of those present, feel curious eyes tracing my every move. Across the room, he sat the man who once vowed to stand beside me. Now he was nothing but a stranger, his eyes cold, his face hardened. He didn't look at me, perhaps because deep down he knew he had already lost everything. My lawyer rose and spoke with a commanding voice. Every piece of evidence, each act of betrayal, abandonment, and deceit was laid out in order, sharp as blades, piercing through his false facade. Photographs, text messages, and the testimony of acquaintances appeared one after another, undeniable and unshakable. He and his lawyer tried desperately to justify, to twist, to defend. But excuses mean nothing once truth has been dragged into the light. I sat silently, needing to say little. Only once when the judge turned to me and asked, "Do you have anything you wish to say before the court delivers its judgment?" I drew a deep breath, lifted my head, and answered, "I only want the truth to be acknowledged. I want my daughter to grow up in a world without lies, without betrayal. And today I stand here, not out of hatred, but for justice, to remind everyone that anyone who chooses cruelty and deceit will, in the end, face the consequences." The entire room fell into silence after my words. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. My voice was steady, but every syllable carried the weight of the years I had endured. When the gavel fell and the judgment was pronounced, I felt as though hundreds of stones slid from my shoulders and crumbled away. He lost custody of our daughter. He lost most of his assets. And above all, he lost the carefully crafted image of the perfect father and husband he had once used to cover his stains. I did not turn to look at him as I left the courtroom. I didn't need to see his face to know what it held. The only thing that mattered was the small hand waiting for me outside. My daughter. Our new life. That day I realized something. Justice doesn't always come quickly. But when it does, it rings as clear as a bell, reminding us that the truth will always find its way to the surface. And I, once a woman cast into the shadows, had finally stepped into the light, unbroken, unbound, and free. And that's the whole story, where pain became a weapon, and the truth could no longer be hidden. What do you think was exposing him at the funeral cruel? Or was it the justice a traitor truly deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next True Reddit stories. See you in the next video.